HarperCollins presents Wolf Siren by Beth O'Brien. Read by Niamh Longford. Prologue. I found my grandmother in the woods quite by accident, so I suppose it made sense that I'd lose her there too. I was 9, and I'd slipped away from my village because the smell of warm rain hung around longer in the trees, but as my mother always told me, I shouldn't have been there at all. I was focused on the ground, watching it beneath my feet carefully. The earth was stodgy, and it gave way slightly with every step I took. I knew that if I was to trip and fall, I'd be covered in mud, and Mother would be furious. So I only looked up when a gnarled branch reached down and tapped my shoulder. "What is it?" The sunlight bounced off the glossy wet leaves like sparkles in a brook, and I squinted through the glistening haze. I have never been able to see well. I don't know how the trees know this, but they often draw my attention to things I might otherwise miss. The branch tapped my shoulder again. A wizened twig stretched out like a finger, and I stared around through the shifting light. The woods seemed more alive after the rain, as though the very air was releasing a sigh of pleasure. But there was something else there too, a feeling that was much harder to identify. The tree curled her twig branches over my shoulder, as though she was preparing to steady me, and I covered the rough twigs with my hand to reassure her. I turned slowly, looking from tree to tree, scanning the ground, peering up into the lower branches for whatever the woods thought deserved my focus. I saw blurs of greens and browns, greys and blacks, but nothing that stood out. So instead, I tried the trick I'd been using for as long as I could remember, and I stayed still. I waited. The movement that caught my attention was steady and assured, not the panicked flight of a bird or some small mammal diving into the undergrowth. I watched the grey shape, and for the briefest moment, I was sure it was a wolf. My heart leapt with a thrill that could have been either joy or fear. I remained quite still and told myself to be rational. For one thing, the wolves only ever attacked the men. For another, there hadn't been an attack since I was 4 years old. But I always tried to avoid thinking about that day. It was the first time I saw my mother cry, and the last time I saw my father alive. Father was one of many men to be taken by the wolves. Where once our village had been famous for its lucrative wolf fur trade, courtesy of our skilled hunters, soon it was associated with nothing but violent attacks. No matter how many men the mayor conscripted to try and keep the wolves at bay, our losses continued to mount up. Shortly after my father's death, the mayor was forced to admit defeat, disband the hunters entirely, and forbid all men and boys from entering the woods. This worked in so much as the attacks stopped, but the restrictions the mayor placed on our village after that meant the fear of the wolves was impossible to forget. All this flashed through my panicked mind in a second, but then the shape moved again, and I realized that it wasn't a wolf at all, but a woman. She stood, dressed entirely in browns and greys, with hair of moon-bright silver and a face too far away for me to read her expression. I patted the tree branch and whispered my thanks to the tall oak. Then I took my first steps towards the woman. We rarely saw strangers in these parts, but I knew the polite greeting all the same. "How do?" I said. "How do?" Her voice was low and steady like the earth. It drew me towards her, the better to hear, and I drank in every word, as if this ordinary greeting was a beautiful poem I wanted to memorize. Mother rarely mentioned my grandmother, but I knew that she'd left our village before I was born. So when this strange woman told me who she was, that she'd come back, I accepted it. To me, it felt perfectly natural that my grandmother should appear from nowhere, and I knew instinctively that she would understand me as well as trees know their leaves.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?